Let's go on to this. Just hang on. Camera, done. So this is the man for the subject. In seeing the day after International Women's Day, of course it would be nice to have a woman up there as well. I'm going to use this other microphone because it doesn't seem as strong. It would be nice to have a woman up there as the philosopher. C'est la vie, what can we say? We can change the world going forward, we can't really change the world going back. Between now and week 11, I'm sure you'll find and maybe even present to me a number of female philosophers who have influenced you. But the Western philosophy has been influenced by this man in a great way. And so he'll be the go-to man. Maybe we'll ask a question about who he is in the final exam. So week 1, the unit aims you've already read. You know, there's a range of concepts. On completion of the unit, you should be able to analyse, critique, evaluate and reflect on information and arguments. That's what assignment 1 is going to get you to do. Compare two things. It's also going to get you to synthesise disparate and complex information. So get information from different sources and put it together, or to integrate it. That's what assignment 2 is. You do a presentation, then you analyse how well you did in the presentation. You're going to interpret and transmit knowledge to others using evidence and judgment. And the last one is to identify the concepts of critical thinking, which will enable you to address and solve a range of real-world problems. Of course, this idea of being a critical thinker is one that's become popular in the last 5 to 10 years at a university level. But of course, the idea of being an intelligent person is not really a new one. However, it's arguable that there are a number of trends which would go against people becoming intelligent. There's a number of the whole fake news idea raises the question, if people are so gullible that they will believe stuff which is not true, what's happened to this critical thinking, or where is it? And of course, this is one of the conundrums of the subject. Intelligent people, those of you in front of me, intelligent people are continually presented with information. If you're in business, you're presented with business opportunities, business propositions, ideas, innovations, sales. And of course, you're continually evaluating whether or not the information that someone's presented is true or not. So an effective businessman or an effective businesswoman is able to successfully identify whether or not this opportunity is a good one or a bad one. So there's critical thinking in place. And of course, the bottom line could be argued that the bottom line is a key measure of the extent to which you are effective in your critical thinking in the business opportunities that survive. Of course, the changes to the business world mean that in addition to thinking critically in the way that people have been thinking in the past, you're also going to have to think critically in new ways that we are unaware of at the moment. And so it is ironic that the course which is preparing people to think more critically in the 21st century come from 500 years BC. Well, maybe we hope some computer programmer came up with a better idea, or an artificial intelligence system has come up with a better idea. And so we are diving back into 2,500 years ago to see what people knew or what ideas people have. So being able to identify them. The course is defined as critical thinking for business. In the feedback last semester, somebody said you didn't talk enough about business. So I will endeavour to give some more business examples. But in a sense, the problem of critical thinking can be applied to anything you like. And so it's more important at the start to be able to identify those ideas which you can use to think critically, and then you can apply them to whatever you want. To buying a new car, to finding that magic person in your life, to finding the career that suits you, or to buying the thing which is going to be useful to make your life better, or whatever it is that you want. All right? The subject should, say this, things are all recorded, I say this with some trepidation in a way, the subject should upset you in a way. Should upset you in a way. Now, I don't want to upset you personally, all right? So this is, sometimes people say, they say, Michael, you said something that was nasty or mean, or I feel upset. It's not my intention to upset anybody, and if you feel upset, come and say, Michael, will you? But the ideas that you have should be upset in terms of, I thought this made sense, but it doesn't. There should be opportunities where you ask some questions which you didn't think you need to ask. So the subject's not trying to offend anybody, but it's certainly trying to challenge. And indeed, that's what the process of critical thinking is to say, why do you believe it? Why? Of course, when we look at people, my guess is that you're not all born in Australia. That's a fair assumption. Right? I guess that you're not all born in Australia. And so that wherever we are born is going to affect the way we think. I was born in Australia. And so my thinking, entirely without my choice, has become an Australian style of thinking. Of course, I went to school, I've been to university a couple of times, and I've lived some life. If I was the same person, of course we can't do this experiment, if I was the same person and I was brought up in India, the way that I see the world would be different. I would have been brought up with different ideas, different symbols, different clothing, different rituals, different politics, different television, and all of those would have shaped the way I think. Right? So that's the reality, of course. The problem is that if I, Michael the Indian, or Michael the Australian, or Michael the American, thinks that what I think is correct, and that the way I think is correct, but of course, it's pure geography in a way. It's pure geography. So the ideas that you have, which are at the foundation of the way in which you think, are largely a factor of the geographic position of your birth. Now, in the subject, of course, what we're trying to do is to say, look, see if you can shake some of that China or India or Burma or wherever it is you come from, and try to look at the ideas from a very broad perspective, which have got nothing to do with geography. Now, anybody who does that will all come and do the bowing to you. I mean, that's a very difficult thing. You might say, it's impossible. It's almost impossible. The more countries you've lived in, it probably becomes a bit easier. The more occupations you've had, the more different sorts of study that you've been involved in will open your eyes to different ways of thinking. And of course, one of the things when any teacher is giving a presentation, then it's within the limitations of his or her experience. In this case, of my experience. So I don't want you to be aggressively, but certainly criticise everything that I say. See, don't believe it, even if I tell you a good story. So, wow, this is what he's saying, this is what he thinks. From his perspective, this is the way it looks. So it should ask some interesting questions. And the payoff, of course, is that it provides you with being able to step outside your initial way of thinking, should provide you with a range of skills which enable you to be more effective in your work and in your life and in your career. That's the theory. So the textbook Of course, the reason we have a textbook is because some students a couple of years ago said there was no textbook, we want one. So we got one. And I was surprised, actually, because it suited me, what we were doing before suited me, because that's what I've been doing. Once I got this book, I found out that it's one of the most well-written textbooks that I've used, which is saying a fair bit, because I've been, been teaching a long time. Buy it if you want, or I think you buy an e-book, or have a look at it at the library. Certainly for those that are interested in learning about the subject, it is worth getting access to a book on critical thinking. We follow this book largely, of course, as I said, because the course matter is not new, most books on critical thinking follow a similar vein. Right, so it's useful. You do need to read. There's a couple of texts here, a couple of books which are useful. In weeks 2 and 3, I'll present a couple more references that might give you a start off to your first assignment. Typically the people who want to learn something about this subject will get, 10, 15 references to get an understanding of what they're talking about. See, the problem of critical thinking is that, in a way, you can simply say, critical thinking, all right, I'm going to be critical of everything. I'm going to be critical of everything. So it's a way of approaching it. However, the subject requires some sort of discipline. Like anything, if those people come in before 5 o'clock, you'll see that I usually have some music playing for a range of reasons. Partly because I like it, partly because there is a connection between music and the critical thinking. I haven't quite discovered it yet, but when I do, I'll tell you. But the discipline of the pianist means that he's practicing this thing and he's using specific skills and techniques. See, people aren't just born a beautiful pianist. They practice and they learn, they practice and learn, they practice and learn, they practice and learn, then they become a very high level. Similarly in critical thinking, there's learn something, practice, learn, practice, learn, practice. And then it makes sense. And then you can apply it, and then you become an effective critical thinker. Steve's the unit chair, that's me. The first assignment is a written paper. Through 30%, you choose a famous speech. Who's chosen their speech already? In fact, there's 4 students who've chosen their speech already. Martin Luther King or John F. Kennedy or Richard Branson's not in there, mind you, but people choose one great speech. They're quite historic speeches. And you need to analyse why it's a great speech or why it's effective. Then you choose an annual report of a company, BHP or VW or something else. And then you assess why that's effective. Of course, the speech is always going to be much more obviously powerful. We will go to the moon. I have a dream. It's going to be more powerful, but the question is not which is the more entertaining presentation. The question is, what's the aim of the speech, and what's the aim of the annual report? To what extent did they achieve their aim? And what tools of critical thinking, what strategies or techniques did they use to do that? It's useful if you have a think about it this week, choose your topics, and then in the second half of next week's lecture we can come, depending on how many people here, come out here and we can talk about it. Because I've taught the subject for about 7 semesters, I can tell you that there's a history. Most students do poorly in the first assignment. Very poorly, I should say. So out of 30, I think the average is like 17 or 18. Why? Because they just think they can write some stuff and it doesn't make any sense. Most people do better in the second assignment, partly because they don't want to fail their subject once they've got a bad mark for the first assignment, partly because they know a bit more about the subject so they can apply some stuff. Right? So, you know, of course you'll do whatever you want, but the typical thing is you'll pass maybe, you know, like a little bit above pass or something for the first assignment if you don't do any work. Of course, some people fail. All right? So it's useful to give you feedback, because not that it's very difficult to change what people do. So it's probable that in 6 weeks' time or whenever you do the assignment, I'll be correcting them and say, oh, same as last year. You know, that's what happens. Students come in, go to sleep for 5 weeks, they remember to do the assignment in week 6, they hand it in. Doesn't make sense, but anyway, good on them. They tried and they almost got to 2,000 words. Okay? The people who do well do some reading. All right, no mysteries there. You can actually tell one of the big markers of whether people are having a go at this assignment is whether they aim for 2,000 words, which is what the target is, or they aim for 1,800. You know, they look at the number, take away the tolerance and say, this is an 1,800 word assignment. That's an observation. It's you in there, hard copies there. The second assignment is you create a 10-minute speech. It's actually 1,000 words. Of course, some people will speak very slowly and some people speak very, very quickly. So the number of minutes of the speech is less important than the 1,000 words. It's a 10-minute speech, and your job is to create the speech using critical thinking tools for 1,000 words. Then the other 1,000 words is to analyse the speech that you have just given. So you do a speech and then you analyse the speech using critical thinking tools. So the second part is the same as the first assignment. The problem for this assignment is really that you have to find something worthy of saying, worthy of talking about. And my guess is that the people who do talks that move the person who's listening to it, which is me or a colleague of mine, they've thought about it for a number of weeks. They've thought about it for a number of weeks. It's something worthy of them or you as an MBA student. Why you like cats, you know, I mean, you can do a 1,000-word talk about cats. But it's not really going to cut it, if you know what I mean. I mean, maybe it is, you know, cats, whatever. You can use all the tricks you can use all the tools to do a talk about cats. But given the course that you're doing, I would expect that you think about and find a topic which is worthy of your intelligence. Play around with it for a couple of weeks. Chat to me on, you know, the discussion board or in the classes that we have, and just see. Come up with something. There's been some very, very interesting and powerful talks. Talks about protest, talks about change, talks about injustice, talks about growth, talks about opportunities. Very, very interesting. People that I know outside of this course, that is my friends, I'll say, the interesting thing about this course is that while it's about philosophy, which sounds like sitting in an armchair talking about ideas, it's the most practical subject I've taught. And that if you are going to give a speech and you use these tools, you are guaranteed to have a powerful speech. It's guaranteed. Now, it's a strange claim to make. We'll come to claims in a moment. But I can say that because each semester I listen to somewhere between 100 and 140 speeches. The ones that use the techniques and the understanding of this subject, it's riveting. Riveting. The ones who don't, it's not. It's like blah, 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 blah. Of course, you've got to know what you're talking about. You've got to have a topic worth talking about. You can't just use techniques, you've got to understand the value of them. But what a skill it is for people at the beginning of their career. Right? That's the pay. So in a sense, it's the challenge and the payoff. This is what I found. People who do the work, learn the skills, they do speeches which are powerful. Some of them have shaken me for 2 weeks. I'm staying home, I'm in my office, I'm going, hey, some of them 2 weeks. Some of them I listen to over again because you just say, geez. All right? That's it. You can either do that, or you can just write 2,000 words about your cat and why you love your cat. All right? So the last assignment is an examination. I'm not too sure why people write an open book examination, but anyway, this is an open book examination. You can bring your library in. You're not allowed to bring anything electronic, but you can bring a library. You can bring all the notes you want. And I will tell you the direction of the questions. Probably by week 7 I will have told you all the questions. Okay? So it's a pretty straightforward. The easiest part of the subject is the exam. The easiest part is the exam, if you know what we're talking about. If you know what we're talking about. So the problem is, it always takes me a little bit of time to work out the rhythm of how we'll run these classes. Normally, for a class like this, I'll usually do a lecture which will be about an hour and a quarter or so, give or take 10 minutes. We'll take a break for 10 or 15, we'll finish off the lecture, and then we'll have some time, an hour, 45 minutes, whatever it is, to talk about the things that matter for you. Assignment 1, Assignment 2, and the exam. All right? So it's not a very social room, as it were, and depending on how many people here, we can sort of have a chat around here. But I don't know. This is how many people came in the first week. Maybe we'll just see. So the problem is this. How can you become an educated thinker? To become an educated thinker, you must think critically. You must critically and carefully explore the thinking process to clarify the understanding and make more intelligent decisions. Make more intelligent decisions than you would without analysing that. Then you need to think creatively, because the process of decision making is a creative process. I was very surprised to find, I used to listen to a psychologist, he talked about the derivation of words. The word decision comes from the same same word as the incisor teeth. The incisors are like a lion or people. And the reason why they use the teeth has got into the decision making is that decision making is cutting off. There's a range of options and you have to cut off all the ones that you don't want and choose the one you do. See, it's getting rid of. You can see why others, and you and I at times, get stuck in unable to make a decision because we don't want to cut off the options. Where do you want to go this weekend? Sydney, Canberra, Adelaide. I want to go to all of them. So you don't go anywhere. So choosing one thing means cutting it off. So this creative thing is creating a future for yourself. We're constantly creating our life. We're constantly creating our career. We're constantly creating the result that you get in this subject. See? I'll tell you, I'll be as clear as I can as to how you can do it. You can get a very good mark in this assignment. I'll show you how you can fail, and I can show you how to do a very sort of ordinary mark. All right? So then you choose. You choose. So that's this process of thinking critically. What is important? Why am I thinking in this way? What is leading me to think in this particular way? Once you analyse your thought process, then you're able to think creatively and think something different. Of course, the world's made of patterns. One of the reasons why the music is connected to critical thinking is because music is all patterns. If you listen to a pop song, they'll have a verse and a chorus. often they'll just have a beat going through. Boom, 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 boom. You see, it's the pattern that drives it. And people love the pattern more than they love the melody. See, that's what people go crazy dancing. It's the rhythm of it that keeps them going. And so people get caught in rhythms, in ways, musically we can see it. In poetry we can see it. In movies we can see it. The rhythm of the film. The same thing applies to our thinking. We get into rhythms or patterns. When we're offered something, we always take this. We look at things in the same way. So the rhythm or pattern of thinking stays the same and it controls us. It limits what we can do. So the problem is to be able to understand what those patterns of thought are, and then to assess to what extent they are satisfying to us. See, to what extent they are making our life better. An alcoholic, you say to him, look, drinking is bad for you. They say, I know that. So they stop. I say, I can't. Right? See? When someone offers me a drink, I take it. Why? I don't know. See? I don't know. But it's going to kill you, mate. So, I know, but what can I do? This is who I am. See, one of the questions of who you are is highly defined by the way you think. And so if you change the way of thinking, then you change yourself. Of course, if you're attached to who you are now, then when people say, look, you could think in a different way, then one way of looking at it is people are saying, look, instead of being you, who you are now, you could be a different person. A lot of people say, I don't want to be a different person. I'm me. See? That's it. I am me. I am my opinions. I am my way of thinking. And so to change me would be I can't do it. See? I can't do it. So when you say to people, look, this is my religion, I say, well, change your religion. No, but it's me. My religion is like from my feet to my... That's it. I'm not asking you to change your religion. I'm just using it as an example. All right? I don't want to offend. You see what I mean? You can see how it could become an offensive thing. I'm not trying to offend anyone, but I'm giving you examples of this. See? Your way, you think of some patterns in your life that you do. The way you dress is a pattern. The way you sit is a pattern. The way that you study is a pattern. It's possible that the men dress in dresses. That's possible. It's unlikely, isn't it, that we will come here next week in dresses. He's thinking about it. That's very flexible thinking. Right? But you can see, so inherently there's no great reason why all the blokes should be wearing pants. It's a pattern. Sutures. Critically thinking. Of course, once you get into the subject, so you mean everything's up for grabs. See? Of course, you see it becomes quite an interesting subject. Everything's up for grabs. That's not really a great thought. It's not really a great thought. I like the way I am. I like the way I am. That's what the subject. So the creative thinking is to imagine, invent, change, design and create. Of course, we know that in 5 years' time there's going to be a whole lot of technology stuff that is going to change our worlds. The more interesting thing is that those technology changes are going to require us to think about organisations in entirely different ways. I was talking to a woman last night. She works for it's a community sort of organisation. They have bought into a program which is trying to change the organisation from being a normal organisation where people tell you what to do and you do it, to an organisation where you come to work every morning and people ask you how you feel. They're continually going to ask people about how they feel. Right. Later on during the semester I'll show you the program and I'll give an update on, I'm a Facebook friend with us, so I'll get an update on to whether it's working or whether the organisation's gone broke. But it's a different way of operating. Of course, the aim, if you're running an organisation and you can make more money, if you want to make more money, you can deliver more services or goods or produce more stuff. If you can do that in a way which is different to the way that you've done in the past, then obviously it makes sense to do it. See, that's a business logic. If it's possible to change the way in which you do work in your organisation to make more money or to be more sustainable or to be more effective, then it's worth doing. The difficulty, of course, is to be able to make that change, or indeed to make the decision to begin that change. There's some really interesting examples of this which I've come across, one of which I will show you. There's a couple of presentations or talks that I'll put on here, as in TED Talks or YouTube clips. So some interesting things that people are doing, which are quite different to the normal way organisations operate. So thinking critically, you analyse, break down, compare, list, sequence and rank, the sort of things that people are able to do. So you put those two things together and you've got an improved organisation, a different design. You refine the ways of going about things. You combine and synthesise the elements, and then you invent new processes, new ways of doing it, new products, new services. So the skills become practical. One of the things that, of course, Steve Jobs is often used as the very successful creative thinker. He had a strange temperament. One of the things, of course, that he did was to spend a couple of years in India. He didn't wash for 2 years, apparently. No, what's that got to do with it, I wash every day. I'm going to think critically. No to the washing. All right, no to the washing. And then he used to just eat carrots or tomatoes or, for weeks. He was playing around with it. Inventive. It's not something that I would choose to do. You eat too many carrots, you end up as orange. But that was part of his process. It's part of it. He did something differently. You see, to be different, you have to. That's the slogan, isn't it? Think different. So, what is critical thinking? The careful application of reason in the determination of whether or not a claim is true. Now, here we go from this sort of. We're going to change the world down to the basics of it. The careful application of reason in the determination of whether something is true or not. It's the activity of looking at the possible meaning and significance of claims. The meaning and significance of claims. It involves careful, intentional thinking. Slow thinking, they call it. Daniel Kahneman, we talk about in week 6 or so. Slow thinking. The use of reason or logic. I'll give you some logic examples and exercises in the class and in the exam. Those people who practice them, you search them on the internet, they'll be the same ones in the exam. Right? This is trick. The judgment about beliefs. The first two are sort of cold, we might say. Right, careful, intentional thinking. Right? Now, okay, I'm going to analyse this. The second one is looking at logic, which is cold, mathematical. The third one then goes deeper and says, I want to look at the beliefs which are underlying this propositional claim. What beliefs are surrounding this claim? What beliefs imbue this claim with meaning? And then the last one is to apply this to a real-world problem that you face. So taking a position regarding the truth or acceptability of a viewpoint. At some point, you've got to make a decision. See? Someone makes a claim, do you believe it or not? Hang on. Well, we're going to think about it carefully. We're going to use some logic. Is there logic into this? Then we're going to make a judgment about the beliefs which are inherent in the proposition or the claim. Then we make a decision. See? It's a slow process. The origins of critical thinking is, for us, is Socrates. He's the man. Socrates is the man. The Socratic method is described in Plato's Socratic dialogues. And the method is this, that if you have a problem, you break it down into a series of questions, and then you find the answer to each of those questions. See? You have a problem, break it down to a series of questions, and then find your required answer. Any examples of a problem? Too early for a participation, but we'll get to it. So this philosophy earned him the crown of the father of political moral philosophy and the leader of mainstream Western thinking. Right, so he's a big thinker. The Socratic method is so designed to help examine one's own beliefs and to evaluate the worth. Who am I? What is true? And what is a good life? So Socrates is the one who says this subject is fundamentally about who you are. Who are you? What is true for me? What is true in absolute terms? What is a good life? So there he is. We've got a bust of him. Socrates. Of course, he's not the only person who was a philosopher. You can choose your philosopher. I mean, for this subject, we had to choose a philosopher, and so Socrates is the obvious choice. The interesting thing is that both of these two guys were active, that is, they were alive, virtually the same time as Socrates. The man on the left, anybody? Anybody? The man, well, say the statue on the left. Confucius lived in China about 500 BC. And then the man to his right, Buddha, who was also lived 500 years BC. So literally the three of them were all around, these great minds. Now, of course, we always think 2018, smartphones, computers, how intelligent we are. You know, we must be the most intelligent people on earth. And we go back 2,500 years ago and we find these three giants, the ancients. Of course there are more, there are more than these, but these are the ones who first come to mind. For me. So they first come to mind. And of course they're asking this fundamental question. What is life? How do things happen? Why do things happen? Why do things happen to me? And of course they come at it with an entirely different direction, because Confucius was from China and Buddha was from India and Socrates was from Greece. So their approach to essentially the same problem, you see, they're attacking the same problem. What is anything? But the way in which they go about it is quite different. They end up with different philosophies. It's usually, now in the slides, I'll just give you, somebody sent me an email, said the slides are all up today. I thought they were. We published all the slides for the rest of the semester. It's difficult for me not to add a couple of slides in, which I will do, all right? But they'll be inconsequential in terms of the content of the subject. It'll simply be a picture to illustrate or a definition such as this one here. So the lectures as they're on the website now, that's the content. So it's useful for us to know what a philosopher is. The first one, it's a lover of wisdom. See, so you don't have to write a book to be a philosopher. In fact, many would argue that an educated person needs to be a philosopher. You need to have a philosophy. It's like a position. What do you think life is? Of course, wisdom is simply the desire for knowledge or for learning or erudition, being able to articulate that. Scholarship, the wisdom of the ancients. Now, why is it that these people 2,500 years ago have something which is of value to us? during the semester you will have the opportunity to evaluate. You know, at the end of the semester, say, look, Michael was very enthusiastic about this, but in fact, we've done the subject, thanks very much, move on. See? So I'll be enthusiastic and say this is what I think is important. At the end of the semester, of course, it's probably useful in the assignments to feign enthusiasm if you don't have it, but to take on board, and then at the end of the semester you make your judgment or you make your call. So the Socratic method is that you have an initial definition of a problem. Having a well-paid job is the way to have a good life. Right, that's it. Having a well-paid job is the way to have a good life. And then the question brings up an exception to that. What's an exception to that? An exception to that. This is a good question. No doubt some of you have got Netflix. No doubt some of you have been watching Narcos. I don't know, has anyone seen Narcos? I thought it was a one show, like 1 hour. After 3 episodes, I now realise it's not a one show. The thing about the Narcos, which is interesting, is about the Colombian drug lords, is that they were paying the government and the police $1 billion a year in bribes. Right? $1 billion, that was what they were giving in bribes. For themselves, they were making much, much more than that. They had a well-paid job. Like, you know, if more money is better, they went to the moon in terms of making money. They went to the moon. But they either got shot or got in jail. Or, you know, it always, apart from the story of it, seems, when you watch it, it's fascinating to see something so corrupt. But the thing is that their life must have been incredibly stressful. Like to know that you're either going to go to jail or you're going to get shot, or your family's going to get shot. So that's an exception for me, all right? Maybe not for you, but for me that would be an exception. You know, so having a well-paid job is a way to good life. Here's another exception. I'm old enough to know people who have well-paid jobs and they died at 45 or 50 from a heart attack or a stroke. Like not one, but a lot of people. Having a well-paid job is the way to a good life. If you die at 45, you know, I mean, I've known people much more successful than me. I've been alive 20 more years than them. So there's an exception. Of course, you don't have to think terribly creative to now start to say, oh yeah, maybe there's a whole range of things. Maybe this claim, this statement here, is an incredibly simplistic notion. But of course, you see young people, more so young, but not necessarily. You just say, right, more money, that's it. You know, the only thing is more money and I'll be happy. Okay. That may be the case, but have a think about it, you see? Have a think about it. Have a think about it. So instead of looking at things in a focused way, you know, this is my target and more of this is going to make me more. Start to think more broadly and with depth. I think that's the difference of the philosopher, and that's why it's useful for us to bring in the examples of philosophers that you are familiar with, you know, and Confucius and Buddha are two examples that I know a little bit about, because they provide these different angles and ask the different questions. Why? You know, why? Why is the more money thing better? Why is it better? See? You play around with it. You see, it should unsettle you. The thing that's, when people, when they're certain of something, this is it. If I get elected, I will make America great again. The beauty of that is that certainty gives people confidence. You know, I am confident. But of course, it's a trick or a delusion. It depends. This is the problem of the subject is this. I'm going to teach you a whole range of techniques. If you use them for good, it'll be very good. However, you can use the same things as tricks. See? To rip off people, to manipulate people, to do things which are unscrupulous. They work. Both the same. Exactly the same techniques. See? So it's a quite an interesting thing. So we start saying, oh, right, if I want to convince this guy, I'm going to use trick 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to use a bit of number 5 on him as well. And before you know it, he will have given me his phone, his wallet, and I'll be driving his car out the door. And he'll be happy. See? Tricks. People do it every day. So, of course, won't you bring up an exception? Having a well-paid job is the way to having a good life, except I don't want to die when I'm 45 of a stroke. Therefore, having a well-paid job that doesn't give me so much stress that I die before I want to die. That's something. Now you can see that this process could be quite exhaustive. You start saying, oh God, I don't want to die, I don't want to become an alcoholic, I don't want to, I want to live a happy life. You see? It becomes a more complex question. So that's why the Buddha, he looks at your eyes and said, do you really want this, mate? Is this thing that defines you, in fact, what you want? So what's the definition of a good life? So you keep on going. Of course, the subject, one of the techniques that people use is metaphors.
The reason why there are a lot of woolly, or at least imprecise...
So I will make use of metaphors. This is the first simple technique you can use. So if you want to convert this subject into something useful, the first one is to use metaphors. That's it. It'll be surprising to me if you don't use metaphors in your big speech at the end of the semester. It will be surprising to me if you don't find the metaphors that people use in the speeches that they give. And of course, it will be a bit of a waste if you don't use metaphors when you're trying to get important points across beyond the course. So this guy uses a metaphor. You see, the problem with ideas is that they're abstractions. They're totally abstract like this, in the air. The good life, whatever. So what you need to do to make any sense of it, or to enable people to make sense of it, is to bring them down to earth and to represent them through a metaphor. And so that's what this guy does. Alain de Botton is a philosopher. He's an English guy. He writes books about philosophy, critical thinking, and here is his metaphor which illustrates the
precise ideas out there in the world is that many people imagine that you can come up with a good idea without thinking too hard about it. Socrates thought this was crazy, and to bring out the insanity of this position, compared thinking to potting. And no one would imagine that you could make a good pot without at least following some pretty rigorous steps. And yet many people imagine that you could come up with a good ethical idea, an idea on how to live your life, without thinking too hard about it. Socrates went further in his analogy. He actually came up with a distinct method, a Socratic method of thought. He identified 5 distinct steps which anyone who wants to come up with a good thought would have to follow in order to do so. And these thoughts can roughly be summarized as follows. Firstly, look around you for statements that many people would describe as plain common sense. For example, that the best jobs are those which are most highly paid, or that happiness comes from being married. Secondly, try and find an exception to this. Could you ever be married and yet unhappy? Or could you ever be in a very well-paid job and yet miserable? Thirdly, if an exception to this statement is found, it must mean that your statement is false or at least imprecise. And in this case, we find that there is an imprecision. Fourthly, try to nuance the initial statement to take the exception into account. So in our example, realize that it is possible to be quite unhappy in a very highly paid job if it's completely creatively unfulfilling, or to be quite miserable in a marriage if you've married the wrong person. Lastly, you continue this process for as long as possible. You keep trying to find exceptions to your common sense statement. And Socrates said, the truth, insofar as anyone's ever able to reach the truth, lies in a statement which it seems impossible to disprove. If we test our opinions in this way, Socrates believed, we'll be able to construct trustworthy and watertight thoughts, in just the same way as a skilled potter makes trustworthy and watertight pots.
See the beautiful richness of that, the metaphor. Trustworthy and watertight pots. I'll get the technology right soon enough. It's gone. What am I doing, guys? What's happened? Turn the volume off. That'll. I hope it's not recording in the background. All right, let's go to this. Back here. Okay, so Socrates is saying thinking is hard work. Thinking is hard work. In business, a lot of people come up to me and say, look, this is it. We've got a problem. I know, let's do this. Some walks with me to be like this and this solution. A lot of us